by Zoom. Hello. We can see you and hear you. Good afternoon and welcome. We've got 10 minutes and we're looking forward to hearing what you wish to tell us. How we use the 10 minutes is entirely up to you. We've received the written material and it's safe to assume that colleagues have had an opportunity to read it. So look, without any further ado, let's get into it. Welcome once again and over to you.
Good, thank you, Chair and members of the Select Committee. As I understand, we also have another one of our members, Nais Manuel, who is the chair of Te Taitokoro Conservation Board, joining us for this submission. So before you today are three conservation boards. To my left is the chair of Te Hiku o Te Ika Conservation Board, Mrs. Mina Pomare Peita. Joining us online from the north is Mrs. Nais Manuel, the chair of Taitokoro Conservation Board, and myself, Nicola MacDonald, representing the Tamaki Conservation Board. And also to my left is one of our members of the Tamaki Conservation Board, Mrs. Kate Waterhouse. Members, I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. Our understanding was that it was 10 minutes each per board. Has that now been reduced to 10 minutes for three boards?
We've got a slot for Te Runanga Papa Atawhai, Northland and Auckland. So there are three that we're expecting to hear from for 10 minutes each.
10 minutes each.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm delighted to introduce our three boards who are here with you today, and the opening remarks to our collective submission will be made by Mrs. Mina Pomare, and she will open with our submission. That will then be followed through by Nais Manuel of the chair of Taitokoro, and then I will make our closing remarks. So without further ado, members, again, thank you for the opportunity to present on the Fast Track Consenting Bill. I now introduce Mrs. Mina Pomare Peita. Kia ora.
Ai tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Mina Pomare Peita tōku ingoa. Ko hau te hea mana o te puari o te Taiao Atawhai. My name is Mina Pomare Peita. As Nicola has said, I'm the chair of the Conservation Board for Te Hiku o Te Ika. I also hail from Hokianga. My iwi is Te Rarawa. My world are my people and my hapu. My world is my tribe and my sub-tribes. I think it's important to introduce the board to the fact that we are representatives of three Māori women, representatives of boards on Te Hiku o Te Ika and Te Ika a Māui. I think the metaphor of the fish is important in this particular presentation today. And for you to understand how important that is, I'm going to say this in Māori and then I will explain it in English. E korua na tātou mo Aotearoa nei. We are talking about New Zealand. Mo te Ika a Māui, the fish, the Northland, the North Island. He whai te Ika nei. This fish is a stingray. Ko mātou ngā puari e toru, ngā ua o te hiku. We, as the three chairpersons, we are the muscle of this fish. Ki te tika ngā mahi, ka neke te hiku, ka neke hoki te ika. If the work is done right, then the tail will move and so will the fish. Ka he tēnei, ka kumea, ka tarawhetawheta, ka piu me he wairangi. But if the work is wrong, then the fish will be out of water and will go crazy. So that's our position, my position particularly, or our position as chairs. We've agreed to this metaphor that I've used of the fish, and trying to illustrate to the panel as to how important that is. As kaitiaki, as guardians, as stewards of the lands that we are chairs of. The Conservation Board, the Te Hiku o Te Ika Conservation Board, was established under Section 6L of the Conservation Act 1987, with jurisdiction in the Korowai area, and must carry out in the Korowai area the functions specified in Section 6M of the Act. The board has the powers conferred by Section 6N of the Act. So these are the deeds of treaty redress lands. For iwi, the Minister of Conservation appoints 4 community members, and iwi nominate their reps under Section 85 of the Te Aupori Claim Settlement Act 2015, Section 95 of the Te Rarawa Claim Settlement Act 2015, Section 80 of the Ngai Takoto Claim Settlement Act, and Section 83 of the Ngāti Kuri Claim Settlement Act 2015. It's important that the panel understand how important those 4 iwi that we are represented on this board. We are the only conservation board that has that representation, and that's because of the korowai. You may not realise this, but these are the 4 claim settlements that make up the statutory board. It's very important. We ask the question, will the fast track approvals bill undermine this? Will the fast track approvals bill eradicate this? You may not also understand that regardless that we are all Māori, we are all iwi, hapu, and geographically different locations. We have different grievances. We have different experiences. Each iwi, each group that I have said, all understand the true feeling and the work that it takes to be kaitiaki. It's important, we have different aspirations, we have different motivations. We're unique, we're not homogenized. It's important that what we tiaki, what we look after on the lands of Te Rarawa, are different to what is looked after or tiaki on the lands of Te Aupori, or Ngāti Kuri, or Ngai Takoto. It is important that the panel understand that and respect that. So we ask again, will the fast track approvals bill undermine this relationship? There will be a loss to mokopuna. There will be a loss to whānau and to hapu and to iwi. The boards work in goodwill. The boards are active and passionate in our advocacy of our respective regions' conservation. We work with various iwi and hapu and conservation organisations and members of the public to ensure that we represent the interests of our locale conservation within a fast changing contemporary environment. We have such powers to be able, that's reasonably necessary and expedient to enable us to carry out these functions, which includes the ability to advocate our interests at any public forum or in any statutory planning process. I ask again, will the fast track approvals bill undermine this? This power to advocate includes the right to appear before courts and tribunals in New Zealand and to be heard in matters affecting or relating to our board's function. So that it's important that the panel please understand this and consider this when you are looking our role as conservation boards, and specifically this particular Te Hiki o Te Ika Conservation Board and our relationship with the Minister of Conservation and the way that this board has been appointed. Honouring the treaty is important. As I said, this particular, those 4 iwi, these deeds have come out, have fallen out from the treaty. It flows out from the treaty. This is treaty redress lands. If the fast track improvements bill is approved without listening to what we have to say today, like the ika, tarawhetawheta, it will be like out of water and it won't know where to go. And I'm afraid that it will go to a place that we may not want it to go. Tēnā koutou. Yeah.
Tēnā koe mina mō tō kōrero mō tō whakaaro ki a mātou. Members, I'm going to now direct our next submitter up to Mrs. Nise Manuel, the chair of Te Tai Tokerau Conservation Board. Nise, the time is yours. Kia ora.
Ai, kia ora Nicola. Kia ora e te hea mana o tēnei komiti, me ngā mema e tū mai nei ki te whakarongo o tō tātou kōrero no te runanga papata whai o te Tai Tokerau. My name is Nise Manuel. I'm the current chair for the Northland Conservation Board. Our board strongly oppose the bill in its current form and seek the Environment Select Committee inform the relevant Cabinet Minister and propose in its report to the House that this draft bill should not become law. The bill elevates the rights of developers and project owners over the rights of all communities and, most importantly, te mana o te taiao. The bill's purpose, processes and criteria will not enable decisions that support conservation values, particularly in relation to the protection of New Zealand's endemic Indigenous flora and fauna. This is why visitors come from all over the world to see our beautiful home. Our boards urge the Select Committee to amend the bill's purpose to reflect the broader focus that promotes sustainable management of natural and physical resources in the manner that protects New Zealand's unique environments. A specific point we actually want to highlight throughout this submission that we have raised is that the bill does not include a treaty principles clause. Our boards are committed to our obligations under Section 4 of the Conservation Act to interpret and administer the Conservation Act so as to give effect to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. This bill denies all but a limited list of elites the ability to comment on projects and proposals. It's undemocratic, and it leaves those ministers fully exposed to opposition should decisions be opposed, including the uprising of protests that we are seeing across our nation today. We've experienced what it is like to work alongside iwi, to work alongside communities, and we've experienced what it's not like when it's only one-man band. Our current experiences from today, I'm proud to be a part of a smaller group that hails from Te Tai Tokerau called Tai Tokerau Border Control that stood up at the time where our country was faced with COVID. I'd like to reflect on this. This is a space where treaty partnership actually flourished. It went from quite a robust space where arguments were being had when it came to border control to then experiencing and ironing out the differences, the objectives, and what we were doing out there to protect our whakapapa, protect our taiao, and to protect the rights of us here as iwi Māori in Te Tai Tokerau and in Aotearoa today. And then I reflect to a negative concept that was very current throughout Cyclone Gabrielle, where we lost lives. And their pathway was done because it had only one system and one head thinking for it. When we collaborate together to bring about good for all in New Zealand, and for all of us thinking that we are rowing on the same waka and not going backwards. We then reflect back to our kōrero that whaiamana actually just put up around the fish. So that is my kōrero for today that I'd like for us here in the Select Committee to pass through. The Environment Select Committee decides to advise that this bill may be passed into law against our recommendations. The board seeks all amendments to the bill necessary to address the concerns listed throughout our submission, including the specific amendments that my next colleague, Nicola, will speak on behalf of. Nō reira, kia ora mai tātou.
Tēnā koe e te tuahine, mō tō kōrero, mō tō whakaaro. Members, we're going to get down into the business end because one of the great things about Tai Tokoro Wahine is we know how to get direct. So we're going to get up close, we're going to get personal, and you're going to enjoy it because we come from the home of the treaty, and we're very familiar in the long line of activism and lobbying and protesting and placing our voices into the wilderness so it is strong and loud, and that you have that deep understanding of what we are seeking. And it's my pleasure to talk to you around how this bill can be strengthened, how you can consider ways in which, as Whaiamana has beautifully articulated, to ensure that the ika is actually flowing and moving upstream and not out on the banks suffering. And how NICE has clearly provided some wonderful examples of when we work in treaty partnership, the magic happens. And it certainly happened in Te Tai Tokoro during those very dark times of COVID, the COVID pandemic that our entire country suffered under. But through treaty partnerships, there was a torch and a light to go forward in. So what does that torch and light look like in the fast track consenting bill? Well, that's going to remain with yourselves, members, and what you're going to put forward to Cabinet. So we want to urge you on behalf of the three boards that when you consider the Conservation Act and Reserves Act, there are some amendments that we think can be strengthened. We want to, and I'll draw your attentions to Section 30 and Sections 31, because I think those are very clearly say to you that boards, statutory boards, we oppose these changes. We seek that the existing Conservation Act provisions are reinstated. You know, there's an age-old saying in New Zealand, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And although the Conservation Act probably is due in some ways for a bit of a review, it is still, its initial principles are still strong and the values that guide conservation are still relevant. So we don't think that we need to remove any of those provisions. We are seeking an amendment to Schedule 4, so that the Minister of Conservation, and I'm delighted to say that we all know Minister Tama Pōtaka and the work that he has done for Māoridom, but we want to be able to, when he's deciding whether to grant a fast track concession, we want to be able to assist and support him in those decision makings. Was quite clear to us that conservation boards weren't actually part of that regime of due diligence. So we think that there's a vital role in which our boards can play to assist the Minister of Conservation. And as we've heard from Te Hiku o Te Ika, the establishment of 4 settling iwi to make up this board is vitally important in terms of good consultation. Members, I want to take us through to the next one, which is all around the land exchanges and what we are seeking there on Amendment 36 is that we're seeking that the bill adopts the existing land exchange provisions already provided for in the Conservation Act, that we restrict land exchange to stewardship land and apply suitably protected criteria for land exchange decisions. Now let's think about that. Stewardship lands for we all will have different views and different lenses when we think about stewardship land. For Māori, as we heard clearly from Te Huku o Te Ika, their land comes under what they call the Korowai area. So it's the Korowai that's gone over all of their whenua. For Tai Tokoro, very similar, and the same with Tamaki. There are lands that we protect for stewardship for kaitiakitanga. Those lands must be restricted to land exchange. Why? Because generally there will be a level of underlying value. Whether that is a heritage value or a cultural value, there will be a value to that whenua. So it's important to us that within the existing provisions, that those remain in place. I'm going to take us down to the next amendments, member, that's conservation covenants. And I just want to raise this to your attention. As I've mentioned here in section 40, we're not aware of any rationale for the proposal to enable conservation covenants to be revoked or amended through a fast track application, and seek that this proposal is removed from the bill. Now, this could be a slight anomaly here, members. What we do know when we're moving through treaty settlements, that there are always conservation covenants negotiated with the settling iwi or mandated authority and the Crown, in this case, Te Arawhiti. So we are, as I say, we are not aware that there's any rationale for why this has remained in, and strongly urge you that this should be removed as it serves no purpose. We're going to move now to the Wildlife Act, and in the last government, the Wildlife Act was confirmed. The Minister of Conservation at that time, Willow Jean Prime, confirmed that the Wildlife Act would be repealed. Now, long overdue, we know it needs to be done. It was done in 1953. The world has changed, absolutely changed. So it is good that conservation are looking at ways in which that original act can be renewed and ensured that it is still fit for purpose. But with the fast track consenting bill, it does in many ways highlight the need for one of our amendments, which is that we seek the bill adopts the existing Wildlife Act provisions for seeking wildlife permits. Now, we will remember in the 1950s, and I'm sure that our chairman coming from the Great Bay of Coromandel area, where there's a lot of hunting and fishing, will know that in those times, seeking wildlife permits to go hunting and go fishing was very, very important. It was actually, it is part of our New Zealand lifestyle. Mm-hmm. What we do want to suggest to the board is that it's important for a bill such as this that there is a connection made to those existing acts, like the Wildlife Act. So we urge you to connect this bill there. There is some other key areas which you've already read, so I will take those parts as read, and that's mainly around access to arrangements under the Crown Minerals Act, drawing your attention to existing treaty settlements and the way in which conservation boards have a role in looking at applications. And there does seem to be some inconsistencies with definitions of joint ministers. It would be very helpful for our role as statutory board members to understand how we can best support a revised and strengthened bill. Ways that we can do that, without a doubt, is how do conservation boards participate? Our concern is that there seems to be an exclusion of public participation in its decision-making processes. We are concerned about that, members. Some of these boards have, just like charitable boards and NGOs, work on the smell of an oily rag. And it's really important. The wonderful thing about New Zealand is that we have a strong voluntary sector, and it's really important that members of the public are actively connected and involved. I want to commend the board, the Parliamentary Select Committee. I understand that you've had hundreds and hundreds of submissions, and that is wonderful, because it absolutely shows that as New Zealanders, as tangata whenua, we are connected to this issue. we want to say, and so we want to ensure that as this bill goes forward, conservation boards, statutory boards are able to participate. We can provide good advice to our minister and ministers. We can provide good advice to the expert panel and with that panel going forward. So we do seek that the Minister of Conservation, acting in his decision-making capacity, invites and considers comments from the relevant Conservation Board regarding an application. It's a no-brainer, folks. We're in this game together. We should be engaging and supporting one another. So I'm at the business end of our submission and the closing remarks. I hope that this is ringing in your taringas.
Yeah, reverberating around the room.
God, it's music to my ears. So let this reverberate. It's a backward step in conservation values. We are overturning nearly 80 years of hard-fought conservation management. Yes, we are the friends of the beetle and of the snails. We are the friends of the tohora. We are the friends of the ngahere. Of course we are, because that's what people overseas, when they come to our country, that's what they want to see. So we need to say, you know, let's look at this bill carefully. There is some unnecessary legislation, and we have some existing well-performing fast-track processes that are already in place. Let's back ourselves, Kiwis. We have got some good things going. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We do want to say that joint ministers can disregard conservation concerns, even with the expert panel. This is probably why you need us around you, because we represent a whole community. So that will be a very helpful thing. We want to ensure that the process is transparent. And I think one of the highlights of this existing coalition government is its absolute commitment for putting things under the microscope, under the spotlight, making it transparent. We love that. So for our recommendation for the Environmental Select Committee is inform your relevant Cabinet Minister and propose in its report to the House that this draft bill should not become law. We do need to have some amendments. We do need to strengthen it, and we do need to ensure that Te Mana o Te Taiao, that the vision that we have for Aotearoa New Zealand remains strong, flourishing and thriving. And looking at the bio from all the members of this Parliamentary Select Committee, and yes, I do my homework. I have checked you, not via Google either. I think you are the right group of people to hear our concerns and to champion the vision that we have, which is an inclusive vision for everybody of this beautiful country. So I'm going to close now and thank you on behalf of the Tāmaki Conservation Board. We'll then head up to Nais to make her closing, and then we'll finish off with Whaiamina, who will close for all three boards. Nō reira, tēnā rā koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa. Nais, the tuku is yours.
Ai, kia ora, e mahi ana ki a koutou, hakarongo ki a tātou, mō tātou kōrero. Thank you from Te Runanga Papata Whai o Te Tai Tokero and all of our communities up here in the far north for hearing us out today. Nō reira, e tuku ana ki a koe mana. Kia ora.
Ai, kia ora. Just to reiterate the metaphor of the ika. So Sir James Henare, a prominent Northland leader, respected by all politicians in his time, he said, ko te tawhiti ke te haringa mai ki te kore e haere tunu. He nui rawa o mahi kia kore e mahi tunu. We have come too far, as we have expressed, we have come too far as conservation boards to not keep on going, and we've done too much work to not keep on doing more. So e tātou mā, please, we are a group of 3 conservation boards that have submitted a full application. We strongly ask that you look at our amendments to this particular bill. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Well, thank you very much, all three of you, for a very articulate and well-made submission. Just before we take a quick question from Lan, because we've nearly used up the time, I just want to reiterate that our advisors to the committee will have been taking careful note of both the written submission and your oral presentation today, and that the suggestions that you've made will form part of what we refer to as a departmental report that will come back to us when we've heard and concluded all our hearings. So you've contributed to that process today, and I wanted to thank you in advance for that. So a quick question from Lan, and then we'll need to move on, but thank you.
Tēnā koutou, thank you so much for your submission today. My question was just around the concessions aspect that I think you've spelled out really clearly, but I just want to check my understanding of it. Because the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment described the fast track bill as being sort of like one rule for everyone else and then one rule for what he called the big end of town. Now, is this the same for concessions? So basically everyone needs to go through the concessions process, but then fast track allows basically special criteria. And would that apply on all conservation land, even high value land for those concessions, or are there limits on that as well?
Well, as we understand that the bill modifies the fast track processes for concessions, but it does apply for all concessions on conservation land. So therefore, there is as you would have seen in our submission, there's an issue around why we're seeking to change the Conservation Act. As we see that the Act already is working for us, but there is a point in time, just like the Wildlife Act, that our Act needs to be reviewed. But not under this, not under an anomaly, which is what the fast track consenting bill does actually create. It creates an anomaly and acts in some ways, acts in opposition. Does it not allow?
And on that note, we need to conclude the submission. But again, on behalf of the committee, can I thank you for your time, for your commitment to conservation, and for giving us the benefit of your input today. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks very much. Colleagues, we're now going to hear from Climate Health Aotearoa, and I think Alex McMillan is here. Hello, Alex. Welcome. You're familiar with the process. We've got 10 minutes. Members have had a chance to read the written submission. How we use the 10 minutes is up to you. We're looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. Welcome again.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Is this going? Is that fine?
Yep.
Tēnā koe chair, tēnā koe committee members, ko Alex McMillan tōku ingoa. Thanks very much for the opportunity to come in person today and speak to you about this bill. I'm a Professor of Environmental Health at the University of Otago and Tangata Te Tiriti Co-Director of Climate Health Aotearoa, a Te Tiriti-based climate change and health, but broader also environmental health expertise research centre nationally. We've got over 60 members, including most of the environmental health and climate change and health expertise in the country with international standing. The fact that I'm sitting here on my own while CHA's Tangata Whenua co-director and other Tangata Whenua caucus members were unable to make the short notice allocation of time, I think is an indication of the unfairness of the process for developing this bill and consulting on it at speed. My colleague, what I want to do today is to keep that empty chair visible to you for my Tangata Whenua co-director, Rhys Jones, Ngāti Kahungunu. I just want to briefly make three main points and then open for questions and discussion, and I'm happy to sort of go into further depth if needed. While we acknowledge the need for streamlining and improving the effectiveness of resource management to achieve the environmental and human health outcomes that are in the purpose of that legislation, which is about ensuring environmental sustainability and human well-being, we think that this is entirely the wrong way of going about that, and urge the committee to reject this bill in its entirety. The bill will not help to address the issues with resource management, while also coming with substantial, both knowing harms to health and unintended risks, which is why we consider it to be of deep public health concern and oppose it in its entirety. We strongly recommend to the committee to return to the recommendations of the independent review of resource management that has been undertaken in 2020, while strengthening this with a better understanding of the role of public health expertise in resource management. And to remind you of my colleague Michael Baker, who I think came and presented what public health is, it is about the environmental and social building blocks of health. Those environmental building blocks of health include clean air, clean water, land that we can grow healthy food on, good planning of the built environment to protect and promote good health and health equity. So our three major concerns with the bill are firstly the lack of any health safeguards in the bill at all. We think this poses a really high risk of ministers not realising and approving projects that have health risks that really risk large-scale public health crises, such as the Havelock North crises and other examples that I gave in our submission. Secondly, the lack of a tiriti or Waitangi clause, when we know that addressing the substantial public health disparities for Māori rests on protecting and improving the environmental building blocks of health. And thirdly, that the bill is written with its explicit goals of increasing fossil fuel exploration and extraction and increasing oil-dependent transport projects, runs counter to the Climate Change Response Act and our international obligations to climate change, which is the greatest public health threat facing us. So again, what we want is broad systemic incorporation of health, including the links between ecosystem health and ecosystem sustainability and health into our resource management processes, a real commitment to strengthening Te Tiriti partnership and tino rangatiratanga in planning at a regional and local level, at iwi and hapu level, and for you to revisit and return to those recommendations of the 2020 Resource Management Review Panel. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, Alex. Scott Willis has a question, then Rachel, and then we'll go to a couple in the room if we have time.
You're right, Alex. Excuse me. Thank you for your submission, and I value you acknowledging Reese's inability to be there with the short time frame. Thank you for giving us a health perspective, and I think it's one thing that we've really not heard a great deal of in terms of this legislation, but I would like you to just tell us a bit more about why, well, understand a little bit more about why this really does need to be considered in that sense, because we've had some people suggest that the bill could be amended or changed, but you've recommended that it's dismissed in its entirety, and I'd like you to dig deeper into that health impacts, because this is something we haven't heard as much of so far.
Yeah, so the ways that public health at the moment get involved in resource consenting and in long-term planning are at multiple stages. And while that's not required or written into the current Resource Management Act, and we think that that needs to be strengthened, there are multiple kind of levels at which public health gets involved. That includes providing expert advice on long-term planning at local government level, providing expert advice to people submitting on resource consent applications and that participation in resource consenting and long-term planning that communities take part in, being asked to act as expert witnesses in various processes at environment court level. And the risks, I think we've particularly seen for not having good public health, broad public health input into those kinds of planning and resource consenting processes, I think have been seen really clearly in Cyclone Gabriel, where 11 people lost their lives, making it a major event, a major fatality event in New Zealand's history, but also more than 2,000 injury ACC claims. the loss of housing, a core building block of health, and the further ongoing health effects of that cyclone, that were really, although it was a climate change event, it was also an event that was caused by poor long-term land use management, where public health may well have been really helpful in preventing those deaths and serious injuries if we'd managed to be involved in a good way, in an ongoing way.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Alex. Can you think of any examples of things that might be consented under the fast track bill where public health would benefit? Like in your submission, you've talked about Havelock North, but some of that issue's been rectified now. So where are the things that you think public health could really help by being involved?
So we know, for example, that large-scale energy projects and large-scale mining and exploration projects are in the list of things being considered. Those projects have complex life cycle effects on health, right from the exploration to the extraction and transport and use of energy, and that brings potential both risks and benefits that are complex enough that public health expertise would be needed to understand those, to ensure that the risks are identified and potentially minimised or avoided, ideally, and that the benefits are maximised. Does that make sense? Likewise, large-scale roading projects we know come with substantial public health risks as well, including road traffic injury and air pollution, which are major public health risks to our population that we need to be able to have some input to identify and avoid.
Glenn, did you have a question? Or you want to go?
I'm happy to go.
Okay.
Oh, kia ora, Alex. Thank you for your submission. My question was, I guess, around interpreting your submission as asking the committee to think more broadly about the economics and of what we're purportedly fast tracking here. But I wanted to ask you if you had any more advice for the committee around the externalities of basically poor health outcomes that we may not be seeing if we're just looking specifically at the economic growths of industry and development.
Yeah, look, I think this government, like any government, sees its role as improving and protecting the health and quality of life of New Zealanders, of all New Zealanders, and doing that in as fair a way as possible. I think that economic prosperity is one building block of that, but economic prosperity and quality of life all fundamentally depend on these ecosystem building blocks of health: a safe climate, clean air, clean water, and safe land for growing healthy food, and that land and those lands and waters being well managed and well protected and sustainable over multiple generations. And so it doesn't matter how much economic growth we have, actually. If we destroy those building blocks of health, we will not be able to protect and promote quality of life for New Zealanders, and that's just very, very basic.
Thank you.
And on that note, we need to conclude the submission. But Alex, thank you very much for making time available to us at short notice. We appreciate it.
Kia ora,
and we
tēnā
appreciate the
koutou.
contribution you've made.
Thank you.
Colleagues, our next submitter is not available. So the clerks advised me that we could use this time slot to take a submission that was not originally on our agenda, but where the submitter is prepared and willing to make a submission now, and that's the Nelson Tasman Climate Forum. So are they coming by Zoom?
By Zoom.
Is it by Zoom? So that's the Nelson Tasman Climate Forum, and I'm advised that their written submission is available on the portal. Hello, we can see you and hear you, Jonah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being ready to make a submission. We've got 10 minutes. The material that you provided to us is available to us. Some members may not yet have seen it. So if you could maybe refer to that in your oral submission, that would be useful. But we're in your hands. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much. I represent the Nelson Tasman Climate Forum, which is a community-led organisation with about 150 members, reaching about 1,500 people regularly. This submission has been approved by consensus of all the members. So when I came to consider what to speak to in terms of our submission, I found a multitude of not only thoughts but feelings in me, and also those I represent and who talk to me about this bill. One feeling that people speak of is shame in communicating with overseas colleagues, saying, how could this happen in New Zealand? Anger, sorrow, fear, as I see it as one more step on the pathway to ecological huge damage, if not collapse. Also solidarity when I resonate with the similar feelings of those around me, and especially with the brave and stirring statement of Ngāti Toa when they say they simply will not allow environmentally dangerous projects to proceed. But the mood I bring to this particular encounter is beseeching, pleading, please call on your wisest selves and don't allow this bill to proceed. Call on your wisdom, which stretches to consider all possible impacts on humans, such as Alex McMillan just spoke about, and other species, such as the prior speaker referred to, including those we don't see on the seafloor, together with the impacts the bill will have on trust in the integrity of governance and democratic processes and respect for te tiriti. Wisdom which thinks long-term, acts through tupuna pono, the good ancestors who shrink from burdening the young with an uninhabitable future world. And wisdom that isn't bedazzled by short-term payoff to the already rich and would quietly shut the door this bill would open, perhaps has already opened, for government corruption. We beg you not to go ahead with this. You've heard and read the arguments against this bill. They've been made by those in our society who are the most dedicated to the long-term common good and the health of te taiao. The people who've been working at community level to reduce emissions, to build resilient communities, to restore nature, to create a more equal society. And especially 2 days ago, the people, including many children and teens, who were out on our streets, in my case, Nelson and Takaka, resisting what they see as an attack on nature. And you've heard the arguments from those who want to mine treasured landscapes and the prolific seafloor to build greenfield developments on arable land and where nature still thrives, to unearth coal and oil to pollute the atmosphere with greenhouse gases. They promise to clean up the mess they'll make, but they don't. Even if they tried, they can't. The greenhouse gases will heat the earth and ocean for another 1,000 years. An extinguished species, 10 million years in the making, is genetic information gone forever, gone from the universe. The developers say we need to mine rare minerals to build the renewable energy systems to enable us to stop using fossil fuels. How about mining the stacks of millions of discarded phones and computers? The rare minerals in them are already refined. They say they'll grow the GDP and everyone will benefit. Mainly, they will benefit, while they impoverish and damage the biosphere, costs we all bear and pass on to our mokopuna. Please don't pass this bill. Thank you.
Joanna, thank you very much. We've got an opportunity to have a question from Scott Wallace.
Kia ora, Joanna. Thank you so much for your submission. Very much appreciated. And look, I think it's very clear that this bill is focused on extractivism. What do you think would be a better approach to contribute to well-being for our taio, for our communities, than this bill?
I think an understanding of planetary boundaries, where we think about global material throughput and our share of material throughput, and energy required, looking at the possibility of reducing energy demand while replacing what we do require with renewable energy, but changing our concept of extractivism to a concept of living within planetary boundaries, and respecting the right of the species that we co-inhabit the earth with, to also find a way to survive and persist and do their ecosystem functions.
And on that note, Joanna, we need to draw the submission to a close, but can I thank you on behalf of the committee for your presentation today, for the time and effort that you've put into making yourself available so that we could hear what you had to say. We do appreciate it. Thank you very kindly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, our next submitter is Te Oho Kaimoana. And are they here? Oh yeah, sitting right up the front. So come on up. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here in person. It's good to see you. You're familiar with the process. We've got 10 minutes. We've had an opportunity to read the written submission that you've presented. We're in your hands as to how we use the 10 minutes, but again, we welcome you here and are looking forward to hearing what you've got to tell us. Thank you.
Well, members of the committee, tēnā koutou, to those online likewise. Ko Graham Hesteloho. I'm the Chief Executive of Te Oho Kaimoana. I'm joined by Kylie Gregg and Adia Hoia Ashwell. We've got just a few short points to talk through and then welcome the opportunity to answer any questions that you might have. So Te Oho Kaimoana works on behalf of 58 mandated iwi organisations, recognised iwi organisations and iwi aquaculture organisations who in turn represent all iwi throughout Aotearoa. Our interest in the Fast Track Approvals Bill arises from our responsibility to protect the rights and interests of iwi in fisheries and aquaculture in a manner that furthers the agreements in the Fisheries Deed of Settlement and assists the Crown to discharge its obligations under the deed and Te Tiriti o Waitangi. We do not intend for our response to conflict with or override any response provided independently by iwi. And today we'll be highlighting 6 of our main points from the response that we've provided to this committee. So point 1, on the matter of Te Tiriti and the treaty settlement inclusion in the bill. We're disappointed that there is no reference to Te Tiriti and its principles within the bill. Clause 6 of the bill must be amended to include reference to the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and this will ensure that the principles of partnership, participation and protection are adhered to within the operation of the legislation. We would also note too that Te Oho Kaimoana is a treaty settlement entity and should be expressly included in relevant definitions. On the point of aquaculture development in the exclusive economic zone, the application of the aquaculture settlement in the EEZ must be resolved within the existing legislation prior to any applications being progressed for open ocean aquaculture within the EEZ under this bill. On the point of a perceived race for aquaculture, the race for aquaculture development space. The bill places, or we note that the bill places pressure on the aquaculture settlement, and we need to see a commitment from the Crown that it will create suitable aquaculture settlement areas to adequately provide for its settlement obligations to the This will enable future development in line with the Māori Commercial Aquaculture Claims Settlement Act 2004, and specifically there needs to be a process developed that requires suitable aquaculture settlement areas to be identified and preserved to ensure that development does not supersede the ocean's capacity. This will ensure that we do not reach a point in time where there is more aquaculture settlement development than potential settlement space, and we would note that this would be in breach of the Crown's settlement obligations. On the point of preserving and extending the Chief Executive's decision on undue adverse effects on fishing, the Chief Executive of MPI needs to maintain the power to make binding decisions. The Chief Executive regularly makes these decisions, has relevant expertise, access to appropriate resourcing, and is familiar with the intersection with the Māori fishery settlement. Additionally, a similar regime to the aquaculture decision must be implemented that encompasses any proposed projects in the coastal marine area and the exclusive economic zone. And it should analyse whether the proposed activities may have an undue adverse effect on fishing rights and interests, including Māori customary commercial and non-commercial fishing rights and interests. Te Oho Kaimwana and mandated iwi organisations should be involved in co-designing those. On the matter of purpose of the Act, weighting above all considerations, all other considerations, we recommend that instead of ranking matters in order of priority, there is no ranking at all. Each listed matter should be afforded the same weighting to ensure balanced decisions, and we recommend the same approach is taken for each schedule, so there is equal weighting to all relevant matters for each approval regime. I've just one final point to make, and that's related to ministerial powers. So we disagree that the joint ministers we disagree with joint ministers having overriding decision-making powers. The final decision of approval should be held by an expert panel who collectively hold appropriate knowledge, expertise, and understanding of the projects and any impacts. With that, I'll
Yep, thank you very much.
take any questions.
Adair
My
and
team.
Kylie, do you want to add anything, or?
Not for now, we're here for questions.
Okay, cool, thanks very much. Lan's got a question.
Tēnā koutou, thank you so much for your submission. I was just picking up on your point, it's point 93, where you talk about a project should actually include an economic analysis of the project. Are you thinking like cost benefit analysis, like full externalities analysis? Like what level are you thinking of when you put this in your submission?
So along the lines of a cost benefit analysis, I suppose the concern for Te Oho Kaimwana was that the bill seems to prioritise development and infrastructure that will benefit the community, but we are quite concerned that it will displace current fishing rights and interests that are a benefit to those quota holders.
Mm-hmm.
And so we think that in order to displace those, there should be some type of economic analysis that shows that the economic benefits from the proposed project actually do outweigh the application before the committee.
Well, thank you.
Hamish.
Excellent. Thank you. And you just touched on briefly in your oral submission, it's also in your written submission about the aquaculture development, 12 nautical miles, well, yes, more than 12 nautical miles out. What is your concern with that?
That's them.
Yeah. So in its current form,
You don't need to put
in its current form, aquaculture beyond the EEZ is the aquaculture settlement. It doesn't apply because it's bound to regional council boundaries as through the RMA. So we would want overlapping legislation to be more explicit in binding that, and so no development to be approved beyond 12 nautical miles until that legislation is more appropriately satisfied. And we have a chance to discuss it and work on that with the Crown as well.
So, what do you mean by satisfied?
Well, that would be for iwi to decide on, because the current settlement was done to iwi, not negotiated with. So it would need to require some appropriate engagement with iwi on those matters as well.
Great. Look, I can't. Oh, sorry, Rachel's got a question.
Yeah, just a supplementary to that. So what you're talking about is the open ocean aquaculture, and maybe the point is that it's quite a new thing, and there's been one consented one, one not consented one, and that's relevant for what you're just saying about how it's outside of the regional council boundaries, and it doesn't have any sort of settlement around it. Do you think the newness of it is relevant to why it's not included in that settlement legislation?
Kia ora. Yes, because at the time of the Māori commercial aquaculture settlement, aquaculture development beyond those 12 nautical miles wasn't really envisaged, and now the fast track bill gives rise to applications that can do almost anything in those 12 nautical miles as well as in the EEZ. And so this is an issue that Te Ohu Kaimwana have raised with MPI and the relevant minister, and it remains unresolved. And so the concern for Te Ohu Kaimwana is that if this bill goes ahead as it is, Māori commercial aquaculture in the EEZ is yet to be resolved, and there could be a race for space for those spaces in the EEZ. And that's, deeply concerning for Te Ohu Kaimwana as well as the iwi with mana moana at place.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't see any further questions. So can I, on behalf of the committee, thank you very much for making yourselves available, for the time and effort that you've put into the submission. And also to acknowledge that I think we're nearly through, the Parliament is nearly through your governance piece of legislation. Can't be too far away. It seems to have been dragging on for a while. I think we're nearly there. So thank you very much again on behalf of the committee.
Tēnā koutou.
Colleagues, we're now going to hear from Ngātai Kai Tamaki Trust. Are they zooming? Yes. They're zooming.
Yeah, other one not turn up. The bottom one.
They didn't.
I think you said they're asking. I was trying to find which names we are.
Hello, Jada. Would you like? Now we can hear you.
Now we're on. Yeah.
Now
technical
live and in person. So look, welcome to the committee. We've got some members here in person around the committee table in Wellington and some by Zoom. We've had an opportunity to read the written submission. We've got 10 minutes. We're in your hands as to how we use that 10 minutes, but we're looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. So welcome once again, and over to you.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou, ngā memo o tēnei komiti, ko Jada McPhee tōku ingoa. Te kauringa o Ngātai ki Tāmaki. Kia ora everyone, my name's Jada McPhee. I'm the Chief Executive for the Ngātai ki Tāmaki Trust. We are an iwi in Auckland, and we definitely play above our weight class a lot, and we seem to find ourselves in a number of submissions at the moment. So thank you for making time for me today, and apologies from my chair who was unavailable this afternoon. So following instructions, I won't read the submission out, and we have prepared those some summary statements just to reiterate the positions of concern for us. I've realised I'm probably going to say words like disappointing and concerned and alarming a few times throughout, so you may want to turn it into a bit of afternoon tea bingo. But to
none of those terms are unparliamentary, so you're fine.
Thank you. Right. Well, yes, I have seen what happens in the House, so yeah. Look, just to reiterate, Ngātai ki Tāmaki opposes the fast track approvals bill in its current form, as it was presented under urgency to the House. We do acknowledge and thank Minister Bishop for inviting us, awkwardly, to submit projects for listed project consideration. However, we were not comfortable with the proposed bill, particularly some lack of clarity for us in some sections of the bill that I'll speak to. And for us, the timing felt a bit off, being invited to submit projects for consideration when this process had not been seen through and in fact submissions period hadn't closed. That felt wrong to us. So like previous submitters that have spoken, we acknowledge, yes, the inclusion of clause 6 and where it states that the Crown is obliged to uphold existing treaty settlements and customary rights under MACA. There is, though, some ambiguity we've found in relation to as yet unsettled treaty settlements, which we are still impacted by or in the process of negotiating. And so we have our own outstanding or are impacted by others. And so there is not enough clarity for our comfort around what that would mean. Further ambiguity of note is in clause 13 in regards to the use of the term consider, and probably later it would come up around the wording have regard to. It's all a bit loose for us. In the direction that a minister must consider treaty settlements or other obligations report, I consider many things throughout my day. I have regard to a number of things with no intent of seeing those through, and we would like something a bit more robust. Ngāi Taiki Tāmaki prefer the term, as is well recorded in the Supreme Court, give effect to. So something a little bit more meaty would be preferred, and we've requested that. It is our position that the choice of this language was purposefully vague in its intent. And while that obligations report that the bill refers to, it has 11 touch points to reference, it's purely a desktop exercise. And we acknowledge that, yes, it is to be run by the Minister for Māori Development and the Minister for Māori Crown Relations, Te Ara Whiti. We would note, it's not a well-kept secret, that this is the same human. I have great respect for this human, but it is the same human who is also, in this case, the Minister for Conservation. And it feels like this was put in, and it is referred in this clause to be two ministers. It is our position that it was put in there to ensure due diligence and safeguarding of Māori interests, and it has been put in with a frame of 5 days. That is a lot for one human and its officers to be able to respond to, I think, to reflect our interests. Similar to the previous submitters, Te Oho Kaimoana, that the fact that the legislation is lacking any reference to the phrase Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles, is a massive concern to us. And we don't believe that this is an error on the author's part. We believe it was purposeful. Our Claims Settlement Act, however, refers to that phrase repeatedly, particularly in the acknowledgements of the Crown, and due to subsequent breaches by the Crown and its agencies at the time, and we've had to hold the Crown to account for that. We would prefer that it is explicitly detailed in there to mention Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles. It is our experience that even when it is explicitly stated, it still needs calling out, but it is easier to do so when it is noted. We appreciate that the legislative statement, what the aim of it is, which is to increase pace in regards to the consenting process for infrastructure and other projects, which sort of then tacks on the end that it also includes concessions and permits. We do agree that a faster consenting process can improve social and economic outcomes and that they can be realised. The bit that's concerning to us is the lack of due consideration to positive long-term environmental outcomes. We work very closely with other iwi, particularly Kaitahu and those down the East Coast, in the conservation and protection of taonga species, particularly those that are endangered, and are involved in many translocation programs. And we work in a completely complex and often pulling in opposite directions way as a small iwi to try and balance those things, but it can be done. And we feel like this bill will undo what it is that we do on a day-to-day basis. There no longer appears to be a requirement to be consistent with existing management strategies or those that are currently in draft between partnering treaty partners and Crown agencies, and that's worrying. And of note, and I was asked to mention the proposal that the bill schedule has made to allow exchange of conservation land for private land and money, e.g. a land swap with a side of coin, again without reference to the acknowledged existing partnerships and existing settlement acts. The scope for bias and interpretation in there is great. And this is really the biggest thing for us throughout the bill is the interpretation. The biggest thing for us is the interpretation and the protection even for the ministers when making these decisions. It's unclear to us how any approval that came through under it as it's currently written could be upheld, whether in this government or challenged later on in a different government, given it's impossible to see how ministerial approval can be protected. Thus far, we haven't been able to determine how it can be kept clear of allegations of bias or predetermined outcomes. We play very heavily in the development and infrastructure space and have done for a long time, as well as aquaculture. We know a lot of people, we know a lot of conversations that have been happening, and there doesn't seem to be a measure in place to protect ministers from that. So we absolutely support that actually it should be a panel of experts that make these decisions rather than sitting with ministers, joint or otherwise. And particularly as there's been no clarity that we could see on how the conflicts of interest, again, perceived or otherwise, are to be managed. And there's a whole nest of issues we see in the recommendations being able to be declined or asked to be amended. And I see Scott's got some questions, so I can do that. I'm nearly there and then I'll come back to you. Look, with any legislation, its efficacy is down to how it's been interpreted and then how your interpretation can be upheld with the writing. And there's just too many holes for us. We, as developers and development partners to the Crown, support faster processes, but not at the expense of the parts of the Resource Management Act actually that we like, and we've been able to restore our parts of the country in our Settlement Act. It's built into our Settlement Act. It works for us, and I don't see this being an improvement. In fact, this feels quite dangerous actually to what we already have in place. It's a massive departure from something that has been working, I think, very well for the country. We would prefer that the RMA instruments retain the current levels of influence. We would prefer actually that no projects are listed in the bill, though some of our development partners would prefer that they are, and that's something that we'll have to navigate depending on how this goes. And then probably just to reiterate, I guess this position, having been on our pre-settlement entity and our post-settlement entity before coming into this role, we stood in front of our grandmothers and our children at the AGM immediately after our Settlement Act and said that and committed to everybody that we would make mokopuna decisions. So, and we mean the ones that we can't even see yet. So not even the little people that were running around, but actually the ones that are yet to come. And that means for ourselves and our parents and grandparents, we may not realize the desired outcomes that they want for themselves because we have to keep ourselves accountable 200 years down the track. This bill doesn't feel like it's something that's going to help us be able to do that. So we would just ask that the bits, if you will, that we've asked to be amended or have further clarity provided on, we'd rather that this is a robust piece of legislation for it to be able to do what it needs to do, rather than rush it through. And we've already mentioned everything else regarding Fisheries Act and things. So look, thank you again for the opportunity to be heard. And yeah.
So Jada, look, thank you very much for the opportunity that you've given us to hear what you've had to say. We've gone over the 10 minutes, so it's not going to be, no, that's quite right. But we do need to keep pretty tightly to time out of fairness to other submitters. But can I again, on behalf of the committee, thank you very much for the time and effort that you've put into making the submission. We appreciate having the benefit of your thoughts and views. So thank you again.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Colleagues, we're now going to hear from Tinapai Resource Management Unit Limited. Here we go.
I've got paper here that
yes,
I refer to. Our
committee clerk will come and distribute that for you.
I ran out of sign years.
So welcome, come on up. You've seen how we are doing things. We've got 10 minutes. Members have had a chance to look at your written material that you previously provided, and we now have this material as well. So we're looking forward to what you have to say and to hearing from you. Well, over you.
Thank you. I'm a fish out of water. I'm a haukainga and a hika at Tinapai. So forgive me if I overstep the mark. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I will begin with my karakia and whakatauki, and they will be in English because I don't want to insult my tūpuna by a mispronunciation of my te reo, which I'm still learning. Karakia, my karakia acknowledges the creation of me and all living things in the universe. Weaving the tapu of the Sky Father and the noa of the Earth Mother together has created their children, the gods. Through the procreation of the gods came all life forms living upon the back of our Earth Mother, hence the origins of man. Bind it above, bind it below, bind it within, bind it without. Bind the people's guide upon the darkness and the light. Bind the customs of the people, descended from large Hawaiki, long Hawaiki, distant Hawaiki. Joined to the spirit, to the tingling, to the world of light. I sneeze, it is the tapu of the Sky Father and the noa of the Earth Mother. Whakatauki is my connection to my whenua, the forest's tane, the sea's tangaroa, and my iwi. Kaipra is Ngāti Whātua's basket of food, where the power of the waves at its mouth still thunder upon the coastline. That is the life force of the people and the love we have for this rohi. Kaipara that stretches far and wide. Poko is our taniwha who is watching. Rangi Nui is the log that bites the wave. Koiroa is the wave. Mahuhu is the ancestral waka. Ngāti Whātua are the people. My name is Mina Henari and I am Kaitiaki and Director of Tinapai RMU Limited, trading as Tinapai Resource Management Unit. I was raised fully immersed in the Pākehā world without any connection to my culture until I returned home to my whenua in my early 50s. Since then, it has been a journey of discovery, learning about Māori culture, principles and values. My business partner is Mikara Miru, who has been practicing kaitiakitanga for 40 years. I have 23 years experience in law as a senior legal executive. We have been in business together for 10 years. We participate in the Resource Management Act process. Both Mikara and I absolutely oppose the fast track approvals bill. In our submission, our position was to oppose the bill based upon its bias against Māori. Māori affirmed their sovereignty over Aotearoa in the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1835. This document asserted that Aotearoa New Zealand was an independent Māori state, that power resided fully with Māori, and that foreigners would not be allowed to make the laws. Following that document in 1940 was the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. The Treaty of Waitangi is a license to occupy, providing the British with the right to occupy the land, to govern over its people, and instilling in Māori a right to carry out tīnoranga, tiratanga, and kaitiakitanga throughout Aotearoa in perpetuity. From 1841 to 1853, New Zealand was a crown colony ruled by a governor. During that period, laws called ordinances were made by the Legislative Council, whose members were appointed rather than elected. The introduction of the colonial ordinances and laws created 150 years of oppression for Māori. The history of 150 years of oppression is presented with this document at Appendix 1. Please read it. This practice of making laws to oppress Māori has resulted in Māori being reduced to second-class citizens. The ministers of today believe that Māori have an equal standing with the rest of New Zealand. This is a false representation. Māori are 37% of people proceeded against by police, 45% of people convicted, and 52% of people in prison. The practice of making laws to oppress Māori is still happening today. Māori own the foreshore and seabed. The Marine and Coastal Area Takutai Moana Act forces Māori to uphold resource consents in the marine and coastal area. With full knowledge of this, local government has started issuing resource consents in the marine and coastal area for 35 years. The Maka reclaims land for the Crown, upholds the Crown's current interests, restricts Māori's rights and interests, and pitches Māori against Māori. Māori sovereignty and customary law will be displaced by Parliament through the clear statutory wording of this bill. The bill will remove all rights and interests in perpetuity afforded to Māori under the Declaration, the Treaty, the RMA and other acts. This bill obliterates 9 existing laws that protect Papatūānuku and Rangianui and all subsequent taonga. These laws also protect the existing relationships that Māori have with our whenua. Some of these laws are the Resource Management Act, the Conservation Act, the Wildlife Act, the Reserves Act, the Heritage New Zealand Pauhiri Taonga Act. We're not opposed to the development and infrastructure required to accommodate our ever-expanding population. We are opposed to the destruction of our natural resources and our natural environment and our taonga to make it happen. The bill will open the door to Pandora's box, and corporates will take advantage of the unfettered access to New Zealand's natural resources. New Zealand will lose control of its natural resources and the right to protect its environment. If you require a fast-track process, then adopt sections 5, 6, 7 and 8 of the RMA and remove the remaining 433 sections. Section 5 to 8 of the Act set down the principles of resource management in a sustainable way. Section 5, the purpose is to promote the sustainable management of natural and physical resources while providing for people and communities social, economic and cultural well-being and for their health and safety, while at the same time sustaining the natural and physical resources for the future generations, safeguarding the life-supporting capacity of air, water, soil and ecosystems, and avoiding any adverse effects of activities on the environment. Section 6 recognises matters of national importance, including but not limited to the preservation of the coastal environment, wetlands, lakes and rivers from inappropriate subdivision, use and development, the protection of areas of significant Indigenous flora and fauna, the relationship of Māori and their culture and traditions with their ancestral lands, water, sites, wahitapu and other taonga, the protection of historic heritage from an inappropriate subdivision use and development, the protection of protected customary rights, the management of significant risks from natural hazards. Section 7, all persons shall have regard to kaitiakitanga, the maintenance and enhancement of the quality of the environment, intrinsic values of the ecosystem. Section 8, all persons shall take into account the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. If applicants cannot uphold those 5 simple rules, then their application must be deferred to the Resource Management Act in its entirety. It is really as simple as that. One fast track to getting a resource consent. The problem we have experienced in our capacity as kaitiaki participating in the RMA is that most of the applications sit outside of sections 5 to 8 of that Act. A fine example is Waste Management's application to place a mega landfill, the largest of its kind, in Wabi Valley, also referred to as Dome Valley. The application itself comprised of 8 large ring binders full to the brim and included 20 plus experts. The opposers provided just as much paperwork and included 20 plus experts. There are approximately 400 conditions, together with 196 conditions added by the Environment Court, who is yet to make a decision. These conditions have been set down because the application destroys 15 kilometres of streams, threatens extinction of the long-tail bat, the short-tail bat and the Hochstetter frog, places a mega landfill next to the Sunnybrook Scenic Reserve and Dome Forest Stewardship Area, where the flora and fauna will be adversely affected by the noise, lighting, smell, and vermin that the dump attracts 24 hours a day.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we've come to beyond the 10 minutes, and I see that you've still got quite a bit of your paper to read to us. Given that we've actually got the words in front of us, I wondered whether you might like to now move to maybe just a quick concluding comment.
Okay.
Please.
There are too many anomalies for a short-term fix that will have a long-term, irreversible, destructive and adverse effect on New Zealand's natural environment. In closing, take notice for any applications within the Kaipara Harbour Rohe. I have included in the appendices 2, 3 and 4 the whakapapa of my tribe, Te Runanga o Ngāti Whātua being my iwi, Te Uriahau being my hapu, and Te Komiti being my tūranga waiwai, over which I practice mana motuhaka, tino rangatiratanga and kaitiakitanga.
No, thank you very much. It's very clear to us that you've put a lot of time and effort and energy into preparing a submission. We're very grateful to have had the benefit of receiving it. Thank you for the time that you've committed to being here and appearing before us today. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Colleagues, we're now going to hear from Peninsula Capital Limited. Now, when you've been sitting down the back patiently, you've been seeing how we do things. We've got 10 minutes. We've got your written material. We're in your hands as to how we use the 10 minutes, but we're looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. So you might like to just introduce yourselves.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair, and select committee members. We'll hopefully make up some time for you today. I'm representing Peninsula Capital. We're involved in the management and development of about $500 million of growth projects across regional and urban New Zealand, including agriculture, viticulture, hospitality and tourism. Vijay.
So Vijay Lala, Planning Advisor to Peninsula Capital.
So first and foremost, in its basic substance, Peninsula supports the Fast Track Approvals Bill, providing, because we believe it over a long term provides significant benefit for New Zealand and New Zealanders. Given the bill's significance, Peninsula did provide initial feedback to the government during the preparation of the bill. We consider the bill would benefit from more acknowledgement to projects that have residential housing supply and benefits to tourism. In relation to residential supply, this remains a key issue for New Zealand and across both urban and rural, regional parts of the country. The benefits of the Fast Track Bill would provide confidence to the private sector to activate urban regeneration and increase regional supply. This would also allow local and central government to work with developers to ensure key infrastructure is planned and available to support such growth. In relation to tourism, as I think we all recognise, it's a vital revenue earner and job creator for New Zealand, again impacting both urban and regional parts of the country. To continue to attract visitors from around the world, New Zealand must invest in all aspects of the tourist experience, which we believe go to the heart of the purpose of this bill and hence our recommendations. We've also recommended some specific amendments to the bill, which Vijay will talk through.
Thank you very much. So I just had 3 or 4 points to make. The first one related to consultation. There are a number of consultation steps within the bill, and our mantra really is to do consultation initially and do it properly. And what we do find, and I think our company's done about a dozen of the fast track applications under the previous legislation, is that neighbours and parties that are consulted end up with consultation overload. So you need to be careful around the extent of consultation that's undertaken at the various stages. Secondly, we support the one-stop shop approach of having a number of pieces of legislation dealt with through the Fast Track Act. Current example that we're working through on the Ellerslie race courses through Heritage New Zealand and the authorisations that are required through that process. I think if those processes are all compacted into a fast track bill or fast track act, then it's more likely that there will be more engagement with those parties as part of an overall application rather than a subsequent duplication of process subsequently. In terms of the lapse date period for resource consents, given that these are major complex consents most of the time because they need to have regional or national significance, our recommendation is a 5-year lapse period as opposed to a 2-year, and the 5-year lapse period is similar to the default period for the RMA, so there's some context there. Hearings and conferencing, we've found through a number of fast-track applications that expert conferencing between witnesses is beneficial to ensure conditions of consent are resolved so that the panel doesn't have conflicting pieces of evidence before them, and similarly the ministers if it gets that far. And conferencing I've found has made it quite beneficial in reducing the number of issues that are before the panel for decision, and also the option for hearings. And then lastly, we think we submitted that plan changes would be beneficial from being included in a similar sort of streamlined process. We're similarly going through a plan change at the moment that's obtained approval from the council, and the council has then gone and appealed its own decision, and we're back to square one. So I think a streamlining of that sort of process would be beneficial for enabling rezoning development and greater productivity in a more efficient manner. So those are the key points we want to make today, and we're open for questions.
Thank you both very much. Now, Scott, surprise, Scott Willis. Sorry, I should have been looking at the screen, Scott, sorry.
No, thank you very much for your submission. And you mentioned that you had meetings with the minister prior to the during the development of this bill, prior to its introduction to the House. I wonder if you could detail what meetings you did have with the minister prior to its introduction to the House.
So no, I'm sorry if I created some confusion. They weren't meetings. We did provide some initial written feedback as part of the process and on feedback of the bill, including our submission.
Okay.
So okay.
So there was no specific meeting. It was written feedback around our thoughts, which then became part of our submission.
Self-initiated, I guess.
Yeah.
I think a letter went out to a number of parties to seek any initial feedback on what could be incorporated in the bill, and that was set out in, I think, paragraph 6 of our submission, what we suggested through that feedback.
Terrific. Look, thank you both very much. I can't see any further questions, and you have indeed helped with our agenda timetabling. But that doesn't detract at all from the value that we feel for you making the presentation that you have. So thank you very much on behalf of the committee. We appreciate you being here. Thank you. Colleagues, we're now going to hear from Takahiwai Maori Committee by Zoom.
Okay.
Here we go. We've got you.
You've got me. I've just gone through a whole lot of instructions.
Yeah, well, you passed the test. We've got you live, and we can hear you and see you. Dr. Keeper, welcome to the committee. We've got 10 minutes. We've had an opportunity to read the written material that you've provided. How we use the 10 minutes is up to you. And to be frank, the daylight coming into your room looks brighter than here. So I'm not quite sure exactly where you are, but welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Tēnā tātou katoa. I'm Tangiwai Mary Appleton Kepa, commonly known as Mary Kepa. As a descendant of the ancestors of the Parawhau Hapu, I've inherited status from the paramount chief Kukupa and his spouse Te Awa. I am the 6th generation of my whānau to be involved in the vision for Māori development with Pākehā industrialists and developers. I play a role in Māori health, education, art, economics, environmental guardianship and governance as the chair of the Kōpua Waiwaha Tūbitu Land Trust established in 1949 and the Takahiwai Māori Committee established in 1977. I am a kaitiaki and the local convener, lead convener of the pest strategy Takahiwai Hills and Forest established in 2018 to control pests and to prevent the spread of Kauri dieback disease. The strategy works closely with the Kiwi Coast Organisation of 135 entities. I am a New Zealand citizen. I am a published writer, editor, and a peer reviewer of proven merit. I have a lengthy tradition of fostering international Indigenous relations through scholarly writing, research, development and education, health and nature, where language and cultural diversity, innovation and sustainability are keenly valued. I write poetry about the degradation and destruction of nature by people through the fossil fuel, port, cement, agriculture, aquaculture, nationwide transport and recreation industries. Among other things, I am interested in bringing clean energy, climate-friendly jobs to the Te Parawhau Hapu, the Whangarei district, the Tai Tokero region, and Aotearoa, New Zealand. In Aotearoa, New Zealand in 2024, families, poor and brown families, have fallen into food impoverishment. Many homes are leaky, inefficient, wasting energy and pumping out climate-wrecking emissions. Faced with extortionate energy bills, poor and brown families across the country have been made to choose between eating and heating. Families, including Māori whānau and hapu, have fallen into fuel poverty. Around Aotearoa, whānau and hapu and iwi leadership are being pulled in all sorts of directions to help care for people and the planet. Consider for a moment that there is a growing demand upon Māori people and our organisations to protect human and non-human relations across generations. These demands are associated with the Māori customary practice known as kaitiakitanga, which creates rights and responsibilities that were affirmed in the Tiriti o Waitangi and under the Marine and Coastal Areas Act New Zealand that is administered by the Office for Crown Relations Te Arawhiti. But there is a stark contradiction between the increasing calls for Māori people, our practices and perspective to save New Zealand from the impacts of a system we neither consented to nor benefited from, and the limited government-controlled resourcing provided us to do that. Over centuries, the Crown has resourced and cemented its own authority in the first place. Māori whānau, hapu and iwi leadership continue to be dispossessed and impoverished. In 2024, the National Party's coalition government wants to slash support for nature against seabed mining, for instance. The coalition is the most anti-nature government in decades. Recently, the ministers have given themselves absolute power to fast-track projects that are destructive environmentally. In the undemocratic coalition, lobbyists for oil companies, mining companies, and fishing companies can talk directly with the minister to excavate nature for their profit-making without the public scrutiny. As mentioned previously, in communities around Aotearoa, Māori people and our organisations continue being pulled in all sorts of directions to help care for all people and the planet, while oil companies, mining companies and fishing companies accumulate more wealth and power and slash nature in the middle of a climate and biodiversity crisis. My appearance before the Select Committee is an opportunity for the Chair to spotlight for Takahiwai Māori Committee's priorities and nature ambitions to cater to the growing infrastructure needs of the Te Parawhau Hapu, the Whangarei District and the Northland region, and most importantly, to help protect a livable future in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It is vital for the coalition government to make progress, from insulating our homes and cleaning up our air, land and waterways, to civil defence and emergency management of natural disasters. None of the progress or development is pie in the sky stuff. The Māori people, the coalition government, the industrialists and the developers need to build clean energy to grow the economy and to ensure a just transition for fair costs and good wages for all. The Māori people, the ministers, the industrialists and the developers should continue working together to pay special attention to recognising and protecting the rights of mana, iho, the inherited status that originates from the Māori gods, rather than the government's bombshell, the fast-track approvals bill threatening to undo the progress we have made together. With new and continuing challenges like climate change, geopolitical shifts, migration, pandemics and other crises, the impact of extractive industries and enduring legacies of colonialism and racism to the fore, I ask the Select Committee to consider seriously what new connections and alliances are being forged, which new pathways created. How do people remain connected with their heritage in an increasingly globalized world? And what are the objects and ideas that continue to connect people within Aotearoa, New Zealand and beyond? Accordingly, I ask the Select Committee to extinguish the fast-track approvals bill and to explore the complex interplay between the environmental, social and cultural landscapes of Aotearoa, New Zealand and their local, regional and global connections and disconnections in the past, the present and future. Nō reira, ka mihi nui. Thank you.
Mera, thank you very much. That was very clear, the messaging. Scott Willis has a question for you, however. Away you go, Scott.
Kia ora, Mere, thank you. We've heard from previous submitters that this bill, as it stands, puts us at risk of cronyism and potential corruption. I'm wondering how big you think that risk is, given the strength of your submission.
Huge. Huge. I say no more.
Well, that's very clear. And on that note, we can bring the submission to a conclusion. But can I thank you again on behalf of the committee for the time and effort that you've put into presenting to us today, and also for the written material that you provided. We greatly appreciate having the benefit of your views and thoughts on the legislation. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we're now going to hear from the Office of the Auditor General. If Mr. Auditor General, if members of your team would like to come up and just feel free to seat yourself as you feel most comfortable. Thank you very much for making time available to come and talk to us. We've got 15 minutes for the submission. We've had an opportunity to read what you've sent us. We're looking forward, as with all submitters, to hearing what you've got to say. We're in your hands, so without any further introduction, let's get into it. Welcome.
Thank you. Ngā mihi kia koutou. So with me, Andrew McConnell, Deputy Auditor General, and Melanie Webb, who's our Chief Legal Advisor in the office. Firstly, I'm not for or against the legislation. Policy matters are for the government to determine, not for the Auditor General. My submission is really that I'm interested in the transparency and accountability arrangements within the proposed legislation. And that's really taking my line as looking at the public trust perspectives of any legislation and the actions in it. So in particular, I looked at, in terms of transparency and accountability, whether we felt they were proportionate to the significance of the decisions that would be made, whether the public gets transparency and can understand the decisions made and why, and whether those decisions can be seen to be not influenced by inappropriate conflicts of interest. And really it's with a view to protecting the public's trust in decision-making, and also protecting ministers from unfair accusations that they might be subject to a conflict of interest. I make two recommendations in my letter. The first is that the legislation could be much more prescriptive around the management of conflicts of interest. So what is a conflict of interest, how it should be managed, what should happen if it's not declared, that kind of thing. And the second is transparency on the decisions that have been taken. So why a decision's been taken to proceed, why they may not have chosen, ministers may not have chosen to follow recommendations from the expert panel, what conditions may or may not have been approved and why. So providing the public with, I guess, a clear rationale for the decisions taken through ministerial decision making. So they're the two things: prescriptive, much more prescriptive conflict of interest, and much more requirements for transparency around decision making. And just to loop back, really, I think that would strengthen the bill. It would help protect public trust in the decisions taken. And I think ultimately it would also provide a great protection for the ministers involved in making these decisions.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask a question from the chair, and then we'll go to members? The focus that you've put on public trust, would that equate, in your view, to what some call social license?
I think that's a different issue, although the two can be connected. I think the trust that I'm playing here is that people can see how decisions are made, and they know that those decisions have been made without undue conflict. So really in that, I think social license is a much bigger question, but certainly trust is important for social license.
Okay, sure. Rachel Brooking.
Thank you. We had a submission from one of the public lawyers across the road, Eddie Clark, about bias, and if somebody, an applicant, has donated to a party donation, his point that it would be very difficult to ever be able to get around any accusation of bias for a minister of that party. Do you have a view on that specific point? And also, I acknowledge your points here about creating criteria. That's helpful.
I think that's the kind of question that my submission is really there to focus in on, that the legislation could be very specific on the kinds of conflicts of interest which ministers involved in decision making would have to declare, and then it could be quite specific on what should happen in those situations. So if there is a financial conflict of interest, which a donation may very well be, then what would be the expectations of Parliament around a decision maker in that situation? And I would imagine, in terms of trust and confidence, that actually a donation would be a matter that I think the public would be concerned about if a decision maker was then involved in making a decision on a project that person had donated to the party. That got a bit confused, but you know what I mean.
We're getting quite good at interpreting things. Go to Glenn and then no.
Thank you, and I guess it probably follows on from Rachel Brooking's comment. Schedule 2 is completely missing from, sorry, there's no lists of Schedule A or B. And I guess following on from that question, is this something you've seen in other legislation, or does that concern you in terms of the fact that, again, public has, this is the chance they get to submit, but they don't actually know what will be in Schedule 2?
So I don't comment specifically on the schedules. Two comments I would make, though. The general position of the office is always transparency builds trust. And so I think that where there's a lack of transparency, then people fill in the spaces, right? And that doesn't build trust. I think the second thing is very specific in our submission, that we think the legislation could set out, particularly around conflicts of interest, but also around decision making, what gets recorded and why.
Thank you so much for your time and being here. I wanted to pick up on, firstly, thank you for pointing out that there's no legal requirement to comply with the Cabinet Office manual, and that you consider that we could have the additional statutory requirements around that. Sorry, I've just lost my question in this. Yeah, sorry, I've just lost my question.
That's all right. You got another one? Where you go?
And I guess it's continuing, thank you. So it's continuing on with, so public trust is important, transparency. So therefore, the challenge to not have Schedule 2 there, and then to run roughshod over so many different bits of legislation, and the fact that the public doesn't have a say once expert panels engage once actual things are being consented. I don't know if you can answer the question, but does that potentially a snowball of trust within government being undone even more?
So as I said at the start, I'm not for or against
Yeah.
the legislation overall. What I'm looking at is the decision-making process of ministers, because under my Act, they are public entities and I can comment in that space. And really, I want to make sure that the Parliament is clear on what it expects ministers to do in those circumstances and how they make those decisions and what conflicts they declare, but also how they are transparent about decisions they've taken to include or not include, to reject or to accept, and particularly where they take a different view to expert advice.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair. And so therefore, New Zealand being such a small place, and the fact I can go to Thorndon, New World, and a minister is left, right and centre, you know, how do we, I guess I'm answering my own question, but how do we protect ministers and how do we protect, I guess, our transparency in New Zealand, because we are so small?
Well, a couple of things. You know, everyone's got conflicts of interest in New Zealand. It's not unusual to have a conflict of interest. It's which conflicts and how do they get managed here. So the example from Honourable Brooking was about donations. Well, I think that would fall into we would want to see some measure of control around that, because that would, I think, to most people's mind, suggest that the minister has some level of conflict on that. Meeting someone in New World Thorndon and saying, how's it going? And I like that bill, or whatever they might say, probably not needing to be declared. So I think we've seen other acts, the Crown Entities Act, the Companies Act, where actually they're quite specific about what they expect, which conflicts they want to see managed and how they want them managed. And I think given the significance of the decisions under here, and a lot of those decisions will be about public expenditure, because they'll be public projects, I think it would be my very strong advice that the committee here unpicks what conflicts they want to see managed and how they want those managed.
Apologies, it's come back to me. So it was just around those additional statutory requirements for conflict of interest. Have you recommended those kind of suggestions in other reports that you refer to in your submission, or has that been prompted by this bill that there would be these additional requirements for more transparently spelling those things out?
Well, conflicts of interest have been something that the office has spent a lot of time looking at in most of its work. We have seen where it's been managed very well in the public sector, and we've commented in a number of reports where we think it could have been done better. I think you've got, 27,000 submissions or something on this section. This is about significant projects. And I think if you want to get it right in some space, it would be right here. This is an enduring bit of legislation where you really wanted to define what you see as a conflict for a minister. I think ministers would like it too, actually, ultimately, because they'll know what the rules are and the public can see that they're playing by those rules.
Thank you.
John, I can't see any further questions, but can I just thank you on behalf of the committee for coming and talking with us today. Andrew and Melanie, thank you also for being part of the process. We have noted carefully what you have said to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we're now going to hear from the New Zealand Federation of Freshwater Anglers.
Kia ora.
Hello. Now, one of you is Casey.
That's me. Mr. Chairman, before we start, we're pretty spread across the country and we haven't rehearsed this. So Casey's our president and he gets first crack. I've got material for everybody to have if they want to read it.
Clark will distribute those around.
I've got some extra copies too. What we did, we're a volunteer organization.
Yeah, sure.
We juggle.
No trouble. So look, you've been sitting there, sort of watched how we're going. We've got 10 minutes. We're in your hands. We'll have a look at this material, and how we use that 10 minutes is over to you. So once again, welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Casey Cravens, president of the Federation of Freshwater Anglers. I've had the privilege of exploring New Zealand's rivers for 3 decades and guiding them for 2. None of my home waters has improved in decades
and our community finds it's heartbreaking. We strongly oppose the Fast Track Development Bill. It undermines the democratic traditions that define our nation, and it threatens our ecological heritage and our national identity. Intergenerational fairness is a driving concept behind our modern idea of sustainability. Today's generation doesn't have the right to burn our collective natural heritage before the next generation gets their share. And that's from the Brundtland Commission report in 1988. It is not a new idea. Katiaki Tonga is our local version of this. We object to the bill because it violates that principle. The bill paves the way for decision-making that lacks balance, transparency, and evidence. At the very least, it creates the appearance of insider trading. This bill is a solution in search of a problem. No, red and green tape aren't strangling New Zealand business. The Heritage Foundation and the Wall Street Journal have both called New Zealand one of the most business-friendly countries on earth. Yet Yale ranks New Zealand a miserable 129th out of 180 countries on earth in terms of its biodiversity protection. The bill attacks the rule of law and decades of legal precedent. This is constitutionally radical. This bill has the gall to tell the Environment Court, the High Court, and regional councils that have struggled over their land and water plans that three wise men know better. The bill sets up an autocratic process that excludes science and democracy from policy. Natural infrastructure. As anglers and conservationists, what worries us most is the bill's potential to degrade our rivers, lakes, and springs. We'll defend the water conservation orders and the bottom line on nitrates till the bitter end. Recreational anglers and guides regard source water and wilderness as the single most fundamental New Zealand infrastructure. As an ecotourism entrepreneur and a passionate angler, I wonder why this coalition assumes it has the right to undermine my occupation and lifestyle. Why do they get to pick winners and losers in this economy? This policy recalls the centralized planning of Muldoon's Think Big, which was kind of Soviet. The Fast Track bill will produce an RMA 2.0. We'll demand a tougher one that addresses cumulative effects and local council captured by special interest. This is a theme that keeps coming up. Environmental degradation threatens tourism. Before COVID, tourism was New Zealand's top export earner, generating $40.9 billion to the country. Tourism helps regional economies by directly or indirectly employing over 300,000 Kiwis. That's from Tourism New Zealand. New Zealand is globally known for its pristine landscapes and a supposed commitment to environmental preservation. Our 100% Pure New Zealand brand should be more than merely a slogan. It's a reflection of our values and the promise that we make to the world. However, the proposed bill directly contradicts these values by fast-tracking projects like seabed mining, blue whale habitat, coal mining conservation land, and building once-rejected irrigation schemes when 90% of our lowland rivers are unsafe for skin contact. 90%. Muldoon's dams on the Clutha wiped out a run of king salmon numbering 40,000 in a good year. Canterbury's irrigation projects have reduced runs of 20,000 salmon to less than a tenth of that. Angling tourism studies peg the economic value of large salmon at $1,900 a fish. That's the economic impact of angling tourism. And that's a 10-year-old figure. Those lost fisheries were potentially worth $114 million a year. And that says nothing about the lifestyle of the locals. National brand is identity. Brand is identity, the story we tell that sets us apart. And there's a strong link between corporate, national, and political branding and the loyalty of customers and voters. Fishing is one of New Zealand's most iconic recreations, and much of the best occurs deep in our conservation estate, a magnificent landscape that inspires 100,000 local, 7,000 international, and 7,000 international freshwater anglers. Another 700,000 New Zealanders and 100,000 visitors fish the sea each year. 1/3 of the country fishes at least occasionally. 1/3. Beyond economics or the cultural influences, we are a nation of explorers and hunter-gatherers. From Maui to Zane Grey, Barry Crump, and Brian Turner, our legends, literature, art, and advertising celebrate our outdoor life. How can we reconcile our national brand with actions that trash the landscape, the land, and the water? Consider the broader implications of how compromising environmental standards hurts our brand. The 2015 Volkswagen emission scandal serves as a stark reminder of how quickly companies can tarnish their own reputations and how this costs money. Their stock price dropped 50% in 3 days, and in the long term, it wiped out $10 billion of their value. The scandal knocked $191 billion off Germany's national brand. This could easily happen to New Zealand if this bill isn't corrected. Regional Development Minister Shane Jones went to Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government. He might consider the work of Chung Fong, a leading researcher there, who argues transparent, democratic decision-making is the most enduring, legitimate, and cost-effective way of developing our environmental policy because it avoids lawsuits and convictions. You can't exclude ecotourism operators and the majority of the New Zealanders who appreciate our landscape and its natural diversity. You canceled the environmental legal assistance grants, and you've ruled out any of the fast-track projects going to the Environment Court. This violates basic principles of natural justice. Closer to home, Auckland University Associate Professor Mike Lee has 2 points pertinent here. The first is that because New Zealand lacks a proper constitution, sometimes its government swings in radical directions every 3 to 6 years. This looks very unstable to foreign investors and they don't like it. Mr. Lee also studies an interesting marketing phenomenon called brand avoidance. This describes customers, and by extension voters, when they turn on a company or a political party that has betrayed their basic values. 3 recent polls show the current coalition out of power over these policies. Even the National Party's own base opposes most of it. This fast-track bill is a highway to hell. Make a U-turn while you can. Thank you for the opportunity. Now, Peter, who has studied Canterbury, is going to address what the ECAN Act has done to give Canterbury one of the highest bowel cancer rates on earth. And this is a template that goes back to Muldoon, the ECAN Act, and now the fast-track legislation.
Thanks, Casey. Peter, away you go.
I'll try and jump in and cut a wee bit out, but basically I've been involved with a couple of submissions and I've butted heads with ECAN, making a few statements, but I try and, you know, I've been a vet since 1974, did the MBA thing, I've got a fish vet qualification from Scotland, and I try and apply science where sadly there's a lack of science in a lot of these water decisions. Freshwater's the only field, I'm not talking about built environment submissions, I'm talking about freshwater because it's so complex and so poorly understood that I think fast-tracking thing would be a disaster. So I've invested much time learning about the science and process of water allocation in New Zealand since I was first asked to make a submission against Trustpower's application to develop a hydroelectric power scheme on the Arnold in 2007. As a lifelong freshwater angler, a veterinary graduate since 1974 with an MBA and postgraduate degree in fish health, I believe I have a suitable academic platform on which to build on to evaluate projects likely to impact on freshwater environments. Only after investing many hours in evaluating the available literature and communicating with experts both in New Zealand and overseas, was it possible to understand that too many hearing decisions turn on models and opinions that cannot be scientifically validated or verified. Commissioners appear to accept evidence based on the reputation of the expert witness or simply fit their decisions to the politics of the day. The expert panel, as defined within the Fast Track Approvals Bill, must include ecologists, fish biologists, or others with an understanding of the complexity and uncertainty that is inherent in exploiting vulnerable environments. I believe not enough consideration is applied to the environment when the use of natural resources are approved for commercial exploitation. While consent hearings are largely a matter of law, it is crucial that an understanding of environmental and ecological effects are part of any approvals process. This fast-track bill appears to go out of its way to exclude any consideration of the environment, and for this reason, the New Zealand Federation of Freshwater Anglers opposes the fast-track approvals bill. Now, if we've got time, I would like to use
Well, sadly, we don't.
Oh, well,
We've
if you would
reached,
mind,
we've reached.
if you would mind reading in your time, my case study with Canterbury, which shows how we've destroyed massive natural capital in the form of Te Waihora, Canterbury's groundwater, our Logan lagoon, springs and lagoons. We have a council out of control where the chair has been stood down for farming illegally. They're facing serial law courts through issuing illegal consents. The Federation is
Peter,
involved in an ongoing court case on
Yeah.
Manawa Energy's alleged water storage in Lake Coleridge. I mean,
Look, Peter, I'm
sort
sorry,
out the shambles that you've caused before you cause a new one.
Okay, look, thank you very much. We've well exceeded the time available to us for the submission, but we thank you both for making a passionate submission. We appreciate the effort that you put into both the written and the oral presentation, and thank you both very much. Thanks very much. Now, on that note, members, we're going to take a 10-minute break and we will reconvene at 3:30 to hear from Andrew Simpson, no relation, Balmoral Station.